I'm David Thompson, 42, a successful financial advisor from Denver, who thought I'd finally found my soulmate after 2 failed marriages. When I met Sarah, she was everything I'd been searching for: intelligent, compassionate, and someone who understood my need to take relationships slowly. She said she had trust issues from her past, which made perfect sense given her vulnerable confessions about previous heartbreak. I admired her caution and felt protective of her gentle heart. But last Tuesday, while helping her organize tax documents for our upcoming wedding, I found a manila envelope that shattered everything I believed about the woman I was about to marry. Inside were 3 different marriage certificates with Sarah's photo but different names, different states, and disturbingly, all from the past 5 years. The woman who claimed to fear commitment had been collecting husbands like trophies. What I discovered next about her true identity would make me question everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the person sleeping next to me every night. It was 18 months ago when I first saw Sarah at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala. I remember the moment clearly because she was standing alone by the silent auction table, studying a painting with such intensity that I wondered if she was an art critic. When I approached, she looked up with these incredibly sad eyes and said, "It reminds me of a place I used to call home." That vulnerability drew me in immediately. After 2 divorces, I'd grown cynical about meeting women at social events. But Sarah felt different. She wasn't trying to impress anyone or work the room. She seemed genuinely interested in the cause, having lost a younger brother to leukemia when she was 22. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, and she gave me a smile that was both grateful and guarded. "Thank you. It's why I come to these things." Marcus would have been 31 this year. She paused, touching a small silver locket at her throat. "He always said if you can help someone else's family, you should." We talked for 2 hours that night. She told me she worked in nonprofit management, coordinating programs for underprivileged children. Her passion was evident, but there was something fragile about her too. When I asked about her family, she tensed slightly. "It's complicated," she said. "I've learned that people you trust can hurt you in ways you never expect. I prefer to keep my past private until I really know someone." I respected that. My own divorce from Jennifer had taught me about betrayal, and I understood the need to protect yourself. Sarah's caution felt mature, not damaged. Our first official date was coffee 3 days later. She arrived 15 minutes early, sitting in a corner booth where she could see the entire cafe. When I commented on her choice of seating, she laughed nervously. "Old habit. I like to know what's going on around me." She had this handwritten letter in her purse that she'd been working on during lunch breaks. It was addressed to her brother, telling him about her day, her hopes, her fears. She showed it to me after our 3rd date. "I write to him sometimes," she explained. "It helps me process things. This one talks about meeting you, about being scared to open my heart again." The letter was beautiful, vulnerable, and completely convincing. She wrote about her trust issues, about previous relationships that had ended badly, about men who had taken advantage of her generous nature. She described feeling broken but hopeful, like maybe I could be the one to help her heal. "I know it's strange," she said, folding the letter carefully, "but Marcus always told me to follow my heart, even when it's terrifying." I was completely charmed. Here was this woman who'd been hurt before but was brave enough to try again. She made me feel protective, needed, special. After years of feeling like a failure at love, Sarah made me believe I could be someone's hero. Looking back now, I see how perfectly crafted that letter was. Every word designed to make me feel like I was rescuing her, like I was the strong one in the relationship. She positioned herself as the wounded bird, and me as the safe harbor. But at the time, it felt like the most romantic thing anyone had ever shared with me. I kept that letter in my wallet for months, rereading it whenever I doubted whether someone like Sarah could really love someone like me. 8 months into our relationship, Sarah moved into my house in Cherry Creek. It felt natural, inevitable. Even she'd been staying over most nights anyway, and her lease was ending. When I suggested she move in, she cried genuine tears of relief and gratitude. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I don't want to be a burden. I can contribute to expenses, but I'm still paying off some old debts from my brother's medical bills." Of course, I told her not to worry about money. I was making good money as a financial advisor, and I wanted to take care of her. She insisted on contributing something. So we opened a joint account, where she deposited her modest nonprofit salary. Those bank statements should have been my first real warning. Sarah was careful with money, most obsessively so. She tracked every purchase, questioned every expense, and seemed to memorize my spending patterns. At the time, I thought it showed responsibility and respect for our shared resources. "I've had to be careful," she explained, when I found her categorizing receipts at the kitchen table. "When you grow up with nothing, you learn to make every dollar count." She rarely talked about her childhood, but she dropped hints about growing up poor, about parents who fought about money constantly. It explained her frugality, her insistence on clipping coupons and shopping sales. What I didn't realize was that she was studying my financial habits, learning the rhythms of my income and expenditures. The few times I pressed for details about her past, she'd get that same wounded look from the night we met. "David, please, some things are too painful to relive. Can't we just focus on building our future together? I'd back off immediately, feeling guilty for pushing. Sarah had this way of making you feel like a monster for asking normal questions. She'd get teary-eyed and fragile, and I'd end up apologizing for being insensitive. When I introduced her to my sister Rachel at Sunday dinner, Sarah was perfectly charming but vague about her background. "Where did you grow up?" Rachel asked. "Over Raleigh. My family moved a lot for my father's work." "What kind of work?" "Government contracting. Very boring stuff." Later, Rachel pulled me aside. "She's lovely, David, but don't you think it's odd that she's so secretive? After 8 months, shouldn't you know basic things about her family?" I defended Sarah, explaining about her trust issues and painful past. Rachel looked skeptical, but dropped it. She later told me she'd Googled Sarah's name and couldn't find much of anything online. "Maybe she uses a professional name," I suggested. "Or maybe she just values her privacy." Sarah had answers for everything. When Franz asked about her work, she'd talk generally about program coordination and fundraising. When they wanted to visit her office, she'd explain that they were renovating, and temporary space didn't allow visitors. The few inconsistencies I noticed seemed minor at the time. She'd mentioned growing up in Colorado, then later referenced childhood memories from Texas. When I pointed this out, she'd laugh and say, "See, this is what happens when you move around so much as a kid. All the places blend together." Her explanations always made sense in the moment. Sarah was brilliant at thinking on her feet, at turning potential red flags into endearing quirks or tragic backstory elements. The one thing that should have alarmed me most was how seamlessly she inserted herself into my life. She remembered everyone's names, their jobs, their interests. She sent thoughtful birthday cards to my friends and remembered my mother's anniversary. She became indispensable, the perfect partner who seemed to anticipate my needs. "You're so lucky," my friend Mike told me. "Sarah's amazing. Where did you find her?" That was exactly the problem, though I didn't see it then. Sarah was too perfect, too accommodating, too skilled at being exactly what I needed. She was performing the role of the ideal girlfriend, and I was her perfect, unsuspecting audience. By our 18-month anniversary, I knew I wanted to marry Sarah. She'd become the center of my world, the person I rushed home to see every evening. Despite her past wounds, she'd learned to trust me completely, or so I believed. I spent weeks planning the perfect proposal. Sarah had mentioned once that she'd always dreamed of being proposed to at sunset in the mountains, somewhere private and meaningful. I chose Lookout Mountain, the same spot where my grandfather had proposed to my grandmother 60 years earlier. The engagement ring cost me $15,000, a 2-carat solitaire that sparkled like her eyes when she laughed. I kept the receipt in my desk drawer, planning to add it to our insurance policy after the proposal. Sarah often handled our paperwork, so I knew she'd help me with the documentation. On a crisp October evening, I drove us up to the overlook just as the sun was beginning to set. Sarah was unusually quiet during the drive, which I attributed to one of her occasional melancholy moods. She still had days when the weight of her past seemed to press down on her shoulders. "You're being mysterious tonight," she said as we walked to the scenic overlook. "Should I be worried?" "Never about me," I replied, taking her hand. "I hope you know by now that you're safe with me." When I dropped to one knee, as the sky turned orange and pink behind the mountains, Sarah's reaction was everything I'd hoped for. She covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face, her whole body trembling. "David, I can't believe this is happening." "Sarah Mitchell, you've taught me that love is worth the risk. You've shown me what it means to truly trust someone with your heart. Will you marry me?" She said yes through her tears, and when I slipped the ring onto her finger, she held it up to catch the last rays of sunlight. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she whispered. "I never thought I'd have something this precious." That night, we called my family to share the news. Sarah was radiant, showing off her ring to my sister over video chat, talking about how surprised and happy she was. She seemed genuinely overwhelmed by the gesture, by the idea that someone would make such a commitment to her. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," she told my mother. "Good things don't usually happen to me." My mother was charmed by Sarah's humility and vulnerability. "You deserve every happiness, sweetheart. David is lucky to have found you." Later that evening, as we lay in bed talking about our future, Sarah grew serious. "I want you to know that this means everything to me," she said, turning the ring on her finger. "I've never felt worthy of this kind of love. Promise me we'll always be honest with each other, no matter what." "I promise," I said, kissing her forehead. "We'll never have secrets from each other." She was quiet for a long moment, and I thought she might be about to share something important about her past. Instead, she pressed closer to me. "I love you, David, more than I've ever loved anyone." The wedding planning began immediately. Sarah insisted she wanted something small and intimate, immediate family and close friends. She explained that large gatherings made her anxious, and given her estrangement from most of her family, she preferred to keep things simple. "Besides," she said, "I'd rather spend the money on our honeymoon. I've always wanted to see Europe." She threw herself into the planning with an efficiency that impressed me. Within weeks, she'd booked a venue, arranged for catering, and ordered invitations. She had strong opinions about everything but always deferred to me when I expressed preferences. "This is our day," she'd say. "I want it to be exactly what we both want." The one thing she was adamant about was timing. She wanted to be married within 6 months, before the end of the fiscal year. "I don't want to wait," she explained. "When you know something is right, why put it off? Besides, it'll be better for our taxes if we're married by December." I was touched by her eagerness and impressed by her practical thinking. Sarah approached our marriage like she approached everything else, with careful planning and attention to detail. What I didn't realize was that she had her own timeline, her own reasons for wanting to secure our legal bond quickly. The engagement ring receipt in my desk drawer was just another piece of evidence she was cataloging, another asset she was documenting for future reference. The morning after finding those marriage certificates, I sat in my office staring at the manila envelope, trying to convince myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe Sarah had been married before and simply hadn't told me. Maybe the documents were related to her nonprofit work, or belonged to someone else entirely, but I kept coming back to the photos. 3 different driver's licenses, 3 different names, but the same face. I kissed goodnight every evening. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, my fiancée, Lisa Marie Rodriguez from Arizona, Jennifer Kate O'Sullivan from Nevada. Each identity was complete, with addresses, signatures, and employment records. I called in sick to work and spent the morning researching private investigators in Denver. I needed someone professional, someone who could either put my fears to rest or confirm my worst suspicions. By lunch, I'd hired Marcus Reed from Rocky Mountain Investigations. "I need you to be discreet," I told him during our initial meeting. "If I'm wrong about this, I don't want to destroy my relationship over paranoia." Marcus was a former police detective in his 50s, calm and methodical. He reviewed the documents I'd found without judgment, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. "How long have you known Ms. Mitchell?" he asked. 18 months? We're supposed to be married in 3 months. "And she's never mentioned previous marriages." "Never. She said she'd had her heart broken before, but she made it sound like bad relationships, not actual marriages." Marcus nodded, jotting something in his notebook. "I'll start with basic background verification, social security records, employment history, known addresses. If these documents are legitimate, there should be corresponding records in each state. How long will this take?" "Initial findings within 48 hours. Comprehensive report within a week, assuming cooperation from out-of-state agencies." I paid his retainer and drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Sarah was at work, giving me time to process what I'd learned and return the envelope to its hiding place. I needed to act normal until I knew more. That evening, Sarah seemed different, somehow more attentive, more affectionate than usual. She made my favorite dinner and asked detailed questions about my day. When I claimed to have spent it dealing with difficult clients, she listened sympathetically and offered to give me a shoulder massage. "You work so hard," she said, kneading the tension from my neck. "I worry about you sometimes." "Do you ever worry about us?" I asked, testing the waters. She paused in her massage. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I don't know everything about you, your past, your family. Don't you think married couples should know each other completely?" Sarah moved around to face me, her expression wounded and vulnerable. "David, you know how hard it is for me to talk about painful things. I've told you about my trust issues, about people who've hurt me. Are you saying you don't trust me?" The guilt hit immediately. Here I was, having hired a private investigator to spy on the woman I claimed to love, and she was looking at me with such hurt in her eyes. "No, of course I trust you. I'm sorry, I guess I'm just nervous about the wedding." She smiled and kissed my forehead. "Pre-wedding jitters are normal. But David, you have to know that you're the only person I've ever felt completely safe with. You're the only man I've ever trusted with my whole heart." Her words should have reassured me, but instead they made me feel worse. If Sarah was innocent, I was betraying her trust by investigating her. If she was guilty, then everything she'd just said was a lie designed to manipulate me. Marcus called the next afternoon with preliminary findings. "David, we need to meet." Not over the phone. An hour later, we sat in his office while he spread documents across his desk. My stomach dropped as I recognized the pattern immediately. "Sarah Mitchell doesn't exist," Marcus said simply. "At least, not the person you know. The social security number she's been using belongs to a woman who died in Iowa 15 years ago." He showed me the death certificate for the real Sarah Mitchell, who had died at age 19 in a car accident. "Identity theft?" I asked. "More sophisticated than that. This is a professional operation. Look at these employment records." He'd found documentation showing that Sarah had worked for legitimate nonprofits in each state where she'd been married, but the jobs had been temporary, lasting just long enough to establish credibility and local connections. "She's done this before," I said, the reality finally sinking in. "At least 3 times that I can document. The marriage records are real legally married men in Arizona, Nevada, and Florida over the past 5 years. Each marriage lasted between 8 and 14 months. What happened to the husbands?" Marcus handed me a folder thick with police Reports and court documents. Michael Torres in Arizona lost $45,000 to credit card fraud and a second mortgage he never authorized. Robert Chen in Nevada had $78,000 stolen from his retirement account. James Murphy in Florida lost $92,000 before he caught on. The numbers made me dizzy. Each amount was substantial but not devastating enough to ruin someone's financial stability without completely destroying them. It was calculated, methodical theft. There are active warrants for her arrest in all 3 states, Marcus continued. She's wanted for marriage fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. The FBI has an open file on her. They've been tracking her movement across state lines. I stared at the documents, my entire world reshaping itself around this new reality. The woman I'd planned to marry, the woman I'd trusted with my heart and my home, was a career criminal who had been systematically destroying men's lives for years. There's more, Marcus said gently. I found evidence that she's already begun accessing your financial accounts. Marcus had tracked down 2 of Sarah's previous victims who were willing to speak about their experiences. Michael Torres agreed to a phone call that evening, and his story chilled me to the bone. She called herself Lisa when I knew her, Michael said, his voice heavy with exhaustion even 2 years after the fact. We met at a veteran support group. She said she was there to honor her deceased brother who'd served in Afghanistan. The pattern was identical. Sorella said positioned herself as vulnerable, damaged, someone who needed protection. She'd told Michael about an abusive ex-husband, about financial struggles from medical bills, about her fear of trusting men again. I felt like her knight in shining armor, Michael continued. Here was this beautiful, intelligent woman who just needed someone to show her that not all men were monsters. She made me feel necessary, you know? Michael had been a divorced contractor trying to rebuild his life after his own messy divorce. Lisa moved in after 6 months, contributing small amounts to household expenses while slowly gaining access to his financial information. She was so helpful, he said. She organized all my paperwork, helped me file my taxes, took care of the household bills. I thought I was lucky to find someone so responsible. But Lisa had been memorizing account numbers, forging signatures, and gradually increasing her access to his assets. By the time Michael discovered the theft, she'd drained his savings account, maxed out 3 credit cards in his name, and taken out a second mortgage on his house. The worst part wasn't the money, Michael said. It was realizing that everything I thought we had was fake. Every kiss, every I love you, every moment of intimacy, it was all just her doing her job. I read the victim impact statement Michael had submitted to the court. His words were raw, devastating. She didn't just steal my money, she stole my ability to trust, my belief in love, my faith in my own judgment. I may never recover financially, but the emotional damage is permanent. Robert Chen's story from Nevada was even more heartbreaking. A recent widower he'd met called herself Jennifer at a grief counseling group just 8 months after his wife's death from cancer. She understood loss, Robert told me when I called him. She talked about losing her parents in a car accident, about how isolated and broken she felt. We helped each other heal, or so I thought. Jennifer had been patient with Robert's grief, encouraging him to talk about his deceased wife, supporting him through the difficult first-year milestones. She'd seemed genuinely caring, never pushing him to move faster than he was comfortable with. She even suggested I keep my wife's pictures up, Robert said. She said healthy love doesn't try to erase the past. I thought she was the most understanding woman I'd ever met. But while Robert was processing his grief, Jennifer was systematically looting his retirement account. She'd convinced him to make her a beneficiary, just in case something happened, then used her access to make incremental withdrawals over several months. $78,000, Robert said quietly. My wife and I saved for 30 years for our retirement. Jenny took it in 4 months. The FBI had provided Marcus with Jennifer's victim impact statement as well. Robert wrote, I trusted her with my broken heart, and she turned my vulnerability into a weapon against me. She preyed on a grieving man's loneliness and stole not just my money, but my hope for finding love again. The third husband, James Murphy from Florida, had been the smartest and the unluckiest. A forensic accountant, he'd actually begun to suspect something was wrong after just 6 months of marriage. But Sarah, who'd used the name Catherine with him, had sensed his suspicion and accelerated her timeline. She cleaned out everything she could access in one weekend, James told me. Savings, checking, credit cards, even my coin collection that had been in my family for generations. When I got home from a business trip, she was gone. James had been the first to contact law enforcement, filing reports that eventually led to the FBI investigation. His professional background had helped him trace Catherine's methods and document evidence that linked her to crimes in other states. She's brilliant, James admitted. Her operation is sophisticated, well-planned, and carefully executed. She studies her targets, learns their weaknesses, and exploits them with surgical precision. Reading through all 3 victim statements, I saw my own future mapped out in excruciating detail. The pattern was identical. Meet a vulnerable man, gain his trust through shared trauma or loss, position herself as damaged but healing, gradually gain access to financial accounts, then disappear with as much money as possible. Each husband had been left not just financially devastated, but emotionally destroyed. These weren't random thefts, they were calculated. Psychological warfare designed to exploit men's deepest needs for connection and purpose. I realized that Sarah had chosen me perfectly, a twice-divorced financial advisor with substantial assets, and a proven track record of trusting the wrong women. I was probably the most promising target she'd ever found. The most chilling detail was how much money she'd stolen from each successive victim. $45,000 from Michael, $78,000 from Robert, $92,000 from James. She was getting better at her craft, more efficient, more ruthless. Based on the pattern, I estimated she was planning to steal at least $100,000 from me, maybe more. Given my higher net worth and the longer relationship she'd invested in building, Marcus's investigation had revealed that I was meant to be her biggest score yet. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, while Sarah slept peacefully beside me. Her breathing was steady and calm, her face serene in the moonlight filtering through our bedroom window. She looked so innocent, so vulnerable. It was impossible to reconcile this sleeping woman with the calculating predator described in those police reports. I studied her face, searching for signs of the deception that had fooled me so completely. The delicate curve of her jaw, the way her lashes fanned across her cheeks, the small scar above her left eyebrow that she'd told me came from falling off her bike as a child. How much of what I knew about her was real? My mind raced through 18 months of memories, re-examining every conversation, every gesture, every moment of apparent vulnerability. Had any of it been genuine? When she cried during sad movies, was she really moved or just practicing? When she held me after nightmares about my failed marriages, was she comforting me or gathering intelligence? The woman sleeping next to me had 3 different driver's licenses hidden in our house. She'd been married to 3 different men, under 3 different names. She was wanted by the FBI for multiple felonies across state lines. Yet she looked exactly like the Sarah I'd fallen in love with. Fragile, beautiful, in need of protection. I thought about all the red flags I'd ignored, or rationalized away. Her reluctance to discuss her past, her vague answers about family and childhood, the way she'd memorized my financial habits and insisted on handling our paperwork, her eagerness to get married quickly, even her supposed trust issues made perfect sense now. Of course she couldn't trust. She was living a lie every single day. Every relationship was temporary, every identity disposable. She probably did have trust issues, but not for the reasons she'd claimed. The most painful realization was how perfectly she'd manipulated my psychology. As a twice-divorced man, I was desperate to prove I could make a relationship work. I wanted to be the hero who helped a wounded woman learn to love again. Sarah had identified that need and weaponized it against me. She'd made me feel chosen, special, necessary. She'd convinced me that I was healing her damage when really she was inflicting her own damage on me. Every time I'd felt proud of earning her trust or helping her open up, I'd actually been falling deeper into her trap. I slipped out of bed and went to my home office, closing the door quietly behind me. Marcus had given me copies of everything: police reports, victim statements, FBI case files, financial records. I spread them across my desk and studied them by lamplight, trying to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. The fake identity documents were incredibly sophisticated, not just driver's licenses, but social security cards, employment records, even school transcripts. This wasn't some amateur con artist making up stories. This was a professional criminal with access to high-level forgers and identity thieves. Sarah's real name, according to the FBI file, was Rebecca Ann Sullivan. She was 30 old, not 31, as she'd told me. She'd been running marriage fraud schemes for at least 6 years, possibly longer. Her first known conviction was for check fraud in California, when she was 25. The psychological profiles in her file painted a picture of a sophisticated sociopath with no capacity for genuine emotional attachment. She scored in the 9th percentile for manipulation and deception, with an IQ of 142. She was brilliant, calculating, and completely without conscience. I found myself wondering what had turned her into this. Had she suffered some trauma that broke her ability to form real connections? Or was she simply born without the capacity for empathy? Did it matter? The woman I'd loved didn't exist. She was just a character Rebecca had created to separate me from my money. The hardest part was accepting that I'd been completely fooled. I was a financial advisor, trained to spot fraud and deception in business contexts. I'd built my career on analyzing people and situations, on seeing through false presentations, and identifying real risks. Yet Sarah had played me like a violin, known exactly what buttons to push, exactly how to present herself to appeal to my specific vulnerabilities. The charity gala where we met wasn't coincidence. She'd researched me, learned about my interests and social circle, positioned herself where I'd be likely to encounter her. Even our first conversation had been calculated. She'd known about my divorces, my relationship history, my psychological profile. She'd crafted the perfect persona to attract and keep my attention, vulnerable enough to trigger my protective instincts, strong enough to seem worthy of rescue, mysterious enough to keep me intrigued. As dawn began to break outside my office window, I faced the terrible choice ahead of me. I could confront Sarah with what I'd learned and demand an explanation. I could contact the FBI and turn her in immediately. Or I could pretend ignorance while gathering more evidence. Each option carried enormous risks. If I confronted her, she might disappear before authorities could arrest her. If I called the FBI, I might lose the chance to recover money she'd already stolen. If I waited, she might accelerate her timeline and clean out my accounts before I could stop her. I looked at the engagement ring receipt on my desk. $15,000 for a symbol of love that was really just another transaction in Rebecca's criminal enterprise. Soon I'd need to decide whether the woman upstairs was worth saving or simply a predator who needed to be stopped. I decided to record the conversation. Marcus had advised me that any confession Sarah made could be crucial evidence for the FBI case, and Colorado was a one-party consent state for recording. I set up a small digital recorder in my shirt pocket before Sarah came home from work that evening. She walked through the door with her usual bright smile, carrying takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. I thought we could have a quiet dinner tonight, she said, kissing my cheek. You seemed stressed this morning. I watched her move through our kitchen with practiced familiarity, setting out plates and opening containers. She'd done this hundreds of times, playing the role of devoted fiancé so convincingly that I'd never questioned it. Even now, knowing what I knew, part of me wanted to believe this domestic scene was real. Sarah, we need to talk, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She looked up, immediately alert to the serious tone. Of course, what's wrong? I pulled out the manila envelope and set it on the kitchen counter between us. Sarah's eyes flicked to it, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw calculation there, rapid assessment of threat and options. Then, the vulnerable, concerned expression returned. What's this? She asked, but I could hear the tension underneath her casual tone. I found this in your closet yesterday, when I was looking for our tax documents. Sarah opened the envelope and examined the contents: 3 marriage certificates, 3 driver's licenses, 3 complete identities. She was quiet for a long time, her face cycling through emotions: surprise, fear, sadness, and finally resignation. I can explain, she said softly. I'm listening. She sat down heavily at the kitchen table, suddenly looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen her. Those aren't what they look like. They look like evidence that you've been married to 3 different men under 3 different names. They look like proof that Sarah Mitchell isn't your real name. She was quiet for several minutes, staring at the documents spread between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. My real name is Rebecca Sullivan. I've been running from my past for so long that I almost forgot who I really was. Running from what? From people who wanted to hurt me. From debts I couldn't pay. From mistakes I made when I was younger. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. David, I was trying to protect you from all of that. Even knowing what I knew, I felt a pull to comfort her, to believe there was some explanation that would make this okay. The recording device in my pocket felt heavy with the weight of betrayal, both hers and mine. Tell me about Michael Torres in Arizona, I said. Tell me about Robert Chen in Nevada. Tell me about James Murphy in Florida. Sarah's composure cracked completely. She buried her face in her hands and began to sob deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. How do you know those names? She asked through her tears. I hired a private investigator. I know about the stolen money. Rebecca, I know about the warrants. I know this is what you do. She looked up at me then, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes. Not the manufactured vulnerability she'd always shown me, but genuine fear and desperation. David, please, let me explain. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. Rebecca took a shuddering breath and seemed to make a decision. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder, more direct. Stripped of the soft vulnerability I'd associated with Sarah, I needed money. I needed to disappear, to start over. These men, they had comfortable lives, good incomes, assets they wouldn't miss right away. I never took everything, just enough to get by, just enough. You stole nearly $250,000 from 3 men who trusted you. They could afford it. The mask was completely gone now, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Michael had a successful business. Robert had a pension and life insurance from his wife. James was a forensic accountant making 6 figures. I took what I needed to survive. You destroyed their lives. Rebecca, I read their victim impact statements. These men will never recover from what you did to them. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. They recovered. People always recover. I did what I had to do. And what about me? Was I just another mark? Rebecca turned to face me, and for a moment, I thought I saw something genuine in her expression. You were supposed to be, she said quietly. But then I got to know you. I started to care about you. That's why I've been stalling, why I haven't taken your money yet. You've already been taking my money. The Pi found transactions, small amounts. She interrupted. Nothing compared to what I could have taken. David, I was trying to figure out how to get out of this life without hurting you. I wanted desperately to believe her, but the evidence was overwhelming. The sophisticated false identities, the pattern of behavior, the cold calculation I was seeing now. This wasn't someone who'd made a few desperate mistakes. This was a career criminal who'd spent years perfecting her craft. The FBI is looking for you, I said. There are warrants in 3 states. Rebecca's shoulders sagged in defeat. I know. I've been staying ahead of them for 2 years, but I knew they'd catch up eventually. So what happens now? She looked at me with something that might have been affection, or might have been another manipulation. Now you have a choice. David, you can turn me in, or you can let me disappear. Either way, Sarah Mitchell is dead. The question is whether you want to destroy Rebecca Sullivan too. Rebecca's confession opened floodgates of questions I hadn't even known to ask. Over the next hour, piece by piece, the full scope of her operation emerged. What I'd discovered was just the tip of an iceberg that stretched back years and across multiple states. How many others have there been? I asked. Besides you. 7 marriages total, but not all of them were for money. She spoke with a detached professionalism that chilled me. 2 were practice runs when I was learning the craft. 1 was for citizenship documents. The others were financial. 7 marriages. 7 men who'd believed they'd found love, only to discover they'd been systematically deceived and robbed. I thought about their families, their friends, the ripple effects of Rebecca's crimes extending far beyond her direct victims. Show me, I said. Rebecca hesitated, then went to her purse and pulled out a second phone, a burner device I'd never seen before. The screen was filled with contacts, text messages, and photos I didn't recognize. I keep track of potential targets, she explained, scrolling through dozens of profiles. Men who are lonely, financially stable, emotionally vulnerable. I researched them 4 months before making contact. The phone contained a sophisticated database of information, financial records, social media profiles, psychological assessments, even detailed plans for approach and manipulation strategies. She'd reduced human beings to data points and profit margins. This one in Phoenix, she said, showing me a photo of a man in his 50s. Widower, owns a construction company, still posting anniversary tributes to his dead wife on Facebook. He'd be easy to approach through grief counseling. You're planning to hurt more people? I was. Before this got complicated. She put the phone away. David, you have to understand this isn't who I want it to be. I got trapped in this life, and I couldn't see a way out. I studied her face, searching for truth in someone who'd made deception an art form. Tell me how it started. Rebecca was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weariness I'd never heard before. I was 22, working as a waitress in Sacramento. I met this older man, Tom, who seemed kind and generous. He offered to help me go back to school, said he'd pay my tuition if I moved in with him. She paused, seeming to gather herself. It was a scam. Tom was running a marriage fraud ring, importing women from overseas and arranging fake marriages for citizenship. When I figured out what was happening, I tried to leave. That's when I learned I was in too deep. He threatened you? Worse, he'd documented everything, made it look like I was a willing participant. Said if I tried to expose him, he'd frame me for the whole operation. I was trapped. Rebecca described 2 years of being forced to help recruit other women, to participate in the fake marriages, to learn the skills that would eventually become her own criminal specialty. When Tom was finally arrested, I thought I was free, but the FBI wanted to charge everyone involved, including the victims. I ran before they could arrest me. So you decided to become the predator instead of the prey. I decided to survive. Her voice hardened again. I had no legitimate identity, no work history, no way to build a normal life. The skills Tom taught me were the only marketable abilities I had. I wanted to feel sympathy for her, but the evidence of her crimes was too overwhelming. You could have gone to the authorities, testified against Tom, asked for protection. You don't understand what it's like to be completely powerless, she snapped. To have no legal identity, no one to trust, nowhere to turn. I did what I had to do to build a life for myself. Rebecca showed me more of what was on the burner phone: communications with forgers who created her false identities, money laundering, operations that helped her move stolen funds, even other criminals running similar marriage fraud schemes. It's a whole network, she explained, people who specialize in different aspects of the operation: identity creation, financial crimes, target research, even psychological manipulation training. The scope was staggering. Rebecca wasn't just a lone con artist, she was part of an organized criminal enterprise that targeted vulnerable people across the country. Marriage fraud was apparently a booming business, with specialists and support systems I'd never imagined. How much money are we talking about total? I asked. From all my marriages, about $400,000 over 6 years. But that's not profit. I had to pay the forgers, the money launderers, the people who provided safe houses and new identities. I probably cleared about half that, $200,000. That's what 7 destroyed lives were worth to her, less than the price of a modest house. The casual way she discussed it, like a businesswoman reviewing quarterly profits, made my stomach turn. And me, what was I worth to you? Rebecca looked uncomfortable for the first time since her mask had dropped. Your net worth is around $800,000, plus the house. I was planning to take about $150,000 enough to disappear permanently. Maybe go overseas where extradition would be difficult. She'd calculated my value down to the dollar, planned my destruction with the same cold precision she'd applied to her previous victims. The woman I'd planned to marry had been preparing to leave me financially and emotionally devastated, but I couldn't do it, she continued. The longer I stayed, the more real this became. You weren't just a target anymore, you were, David. You made me remember what it felt like to be cared for, to feel safe. I wanted to believe her, but I'd learned not to trust anything, Rebecca said. If that's true, why didn't you just tell me? We could have figured something out together. Because you would have done exactly what you're doing now, looked at me like I'm a monster. Because there's no way back from what I've done. Because I knew that once you learned the truth, Sarah Mitchell would have to die. Rebecca was right about one thing. I was looking at her like a monster. Because that's what she was. Regardless of how she'd gotten there. 7 men had trusted her with their hearts, and she'd systematically destroyed them for profit. The 3 woman I'd loved was just another character in her criminal repertoire. But as I watched her sitting across from me, I realized something else. For the first time since I'd known her, Rebecca was telling the truth. The mask was finally off. And what I saw underneath was both more and less than I'd expected. The innocent victim she'd pretended to be, but not the calculating sociopath from the FBI profile either. She was a broken person who'd chosen to break others rather than heal herself. And now I had to decide what to do about it. The next morning, I woke up alone. Rebecca's side of the bed was cold, and I could hear movement downstairs, drawers opening and closing, the sound of papers shuffling. My first thought was that she was destroying evidence. Preparing to run, I found her in the kitchen, methodically going through documents and sorting them into piles. She'd changed clothes, gone were the soft sweaters and feminine dresses of Sarah Mitchell. Rebecca wore dark jeans, a plain black sweater, and sturdy boots. Even her posture was different, more alert and purposeful. Going somewhere, she looked up from the papers spread across our kitchen table. I have too. You know I can't stay. We could figure something out. You could turn yourself in. Cooperate with the FBI. With a good lawyer, David? I've been running federal crimes for 6 years. There's no plea deal that keeps me out of prison for the next 20 years. She went back to sorting documents. For by the time I got out, my life would be over. I watched her work, noting the efficiency of her movements. This wasn't panic or desperation. This was a well-rehearsed routine she'd probably performed before. You've done this before. Disappeared 3 times. When Tom was arrested, when the Nevada investigation got too close, and when James Murphy in Florida figured out who I was, she held up a passport I'd never seen before. Rebecca Sullivan is just one identity. I have others. The passport was Canadian, issued to someone named Michelle Carter. The photo was Rebecca, but with shorter dark hair and glasses. It looked completely authentic. How many identities do you have? Enough. She continued packing, moving through our house like she was following a mental checklist. The key is having exit strategies prepared before you need them. I've had a bag packed and ready to go since the day I moved in here. She led me to our bedroom closet and moved aside a section of hanging clothes to reveal a hidden compartment I'd never noticed. Inside was a large duffel bag containing cash, documents, phones, and what looked like disguise materials. $50,000 in cash, she explained, unzipping the bag. Multiple IDs, credit cards and different names. Phones with clean numbers. Everything I need to disappear completely. I stared at the contents of the bag, impressed despite myself by the thoroughness of her preparations. You've been planning to leave me from the beginning. I have been planning to leave everyone from the beginning. That's how you survive in this life, always have an escape route. Rebecca pulled out a folder containing airplane tickets, hotel reservations, and what appeared to be rental agreements. Everything was arranged for someone named Michelle Carter. Costa Rica, she said, showing me the airline tickets. No extradition treaty with the United States for nonviolent crimes. I have a place rented there, bank accounts established, everything I need to start over. The tickets were dated for that afternoon. Rebecca had been planning to disappear within hours of our confrontation, regardless of how it had gone. You were going to leave today anyway. I was going to leave next week, after taking what I needed from your accounts. But finding those documents forced my timeline. She looked at me with something that might have been regret. I'm sorry, David. I really was trying to find a way to do this without hurting you. By stealing my money and disappearing without explanation. By taking less than I could have and leaving you a letter explaining why I had to go. It wasn't a good plan, but it was the best I could come up with. I realized that Rebecca had been planning our entire relationship around this moment. The eventual discovery, the confrontation, the escape. Every day we'd spent together had been calculated against this exit strategy. The engagement, I said suddenly. You were never planning to go through with the wedding. The wedding was covered. Married couples have better access to each other's assets. But the engagement period was the sweet spot, maximum trust and financial access with minimal legal complications. Everything clicked into place. The rushed timeline for the wedding, her insistence on handling our financial paperwork, her careful study of my spending habits. I'd been systematically prepared for harvest like a crop. How much have you already taken? Rebecca looked uncomfortable. About $12,000 over the past 6 months. Small withdrawals, cash advances, Purchases that looked normal. Nothing you'd notice unless you were specifically looking for it. $12,000. She'd been stealing from me for months, while sleeping next to me, making love to me, planning our future together. The violation was almost worse than the theft itself. I can transfer it back, she offered, before I leave. Consider it a gesture of good faith. Good faith. I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice anymore. You've been robbing me for months, while pretending to love me, and you think $12,000 is good faith. I could have taken everything. David, your entire savings account, your investment portfolio, a mortgage against the house. I've had access to all of it for over a year. Her voice was matter-of-fact, businesslike. $12,000 is what I needed for operating expenses. The real theft was supposed to happen next week. The casual way she discussed destroying my financial life made me realize how completely I'd misjudged who I was dealing with. This wasn't someone who'd made a few desperate mistakes. This was a professional criminal who'd turned human predation into a science. I have to call the FBI, I said. Rebecca nodded, continuing her packing. I know. I'd probably do the same thing in your position. Then why are you telling me your escape plan? She paused in her preparations and looked at me directly. Because, for 18 months, you made me remember what it felt like to be human. Because you deserved better than waking up to find me gone with no explanation. Because somewhere in all the lies, I think I actually did fall in love with you. I stared at her, trying to determine if this was just another manipulation. But there was something different in her voice, a vulnerability that seemed genuine for the first time since her mask had come off. If that's true, then stay. Face the consequences. We'll figure it out together. Rebecca smiled sadly, shouldering her escape bag. That's exactly what someone who loved me would say. But David, I can't ask you to throw your life away for someone like me, and I can't survive 20 years in federal prison. She kissed me on the cheek, a gesture so familiar yet now completely foreign. Call the FBI in 2 hours, she said. That'll give me enough of a head start to get clear. After that, Rebecca Sullivan will be dead too. I watched her walk toward the door, carrying everything she needed to vanish completely. In her other hand were the airline tickets that would take her beyond the reach of American justice. I had exactly 2 hours to decide whether to let her go or destroy any chance she had of escape. I called the FBI 15 minutes after Rebecca left. I couldn't let her disappear, couldn't let her find another victim, couldn't live with myself knowing I'd aided her escape. Special Agent Patricia Williams answered on the second ring. Agent Williams, this is David Thompson in Denver. I believe I have information about Rebecca Sullivan. There was a brief pause, then sudden intensity in her voice. Mr. Thompson, we've been looking for Rebecca Sullivan for 2 years. Where are you calling from? My home. She's been living with me for 18 months under the name Sarah Mitchell. She left about 20 minutes ago with escape documents and airline tickets to Costa Rica. Work was thick and complex, detailing each of our relationships with Rebecca and the specific damages we'd suffered. Reading through everyone's experiences was heartbreaking. The same patterns of manipulation repeated across multiple states. And I want to add something about the emotional damage, Robert said as we reviewed the documents. The money can theoretically be replaced. The psychological damage is permanent. We worked with the lawyers to include provisions for emotional distress and psychological counseling costs. Rebecca hadn't just stolen our money, she'd stolen our ability to trust, our faith in our own judgment, our belief in authentic human connection. I haven't been on a date since Rebecca, Michael admitted. Every woman I meet, I find myself analyzing her motives, looking for signs of deception. She broke something in me that I don't know how to fix. I understand, I said. I keep thinking about all the moments I thought were genuine times. She seemed vulnerable, or loving, or scared. Were any of them real? How do you ever trust your own perceptions again? Agent Williams had warned us that recovery would be a long process, that victims of sophisticated fraud often struggled with self-blame and paranoia for years afterward. You were targeted by a professional, she'd reminded us. Rebecca Sullivan spent years perfecting her techniques. The fact that she fooled you doesn't reflect badly on your judgment, it reflects the sophistication of her operation. But intellectual understanding was different from emotional healing. We'd all been violated in the most intimate way possible. Someone had weaponized our capacity for love and used it to destroy us. Maybe that's why we need to stick together, Robert suggested. We're the only people who really understand what this feels like. We agreed to stay in touch throughout the legal proceedings, to support each other through the trial and whatever came after. None of us had asked to become part of Rebecca's victim network, but now that we were, we could at least help each other heal. The class action lawsuit was filed on a Tuesday morning in federal court. By that afternoon, news outlets were reporting on the marriage fraud victims seeking justice. Our attorneys had warned us about media attention, but it was still surreal to see our personal tragedy become a news story. Maybe it's good, Michael said when reporters called, seeking interviews. Maybe other victims will come forward. Maybe it'll help someone recognize the warning signs before it's too late. We decided to speak publicly about our experiences, despite the embarrassment and invasion of privacy. If sharing our stories could prevent Rebecca from finding more victims, or help other people recognize similar predators, Then the humiliation would be worth it. Rebecca's arrest had given U.S. justice, but speaking out gave us purpose. We couldn't undo what had happened to us, but we could try to protect others from experiencing the same devastation. Preparing for Rebecca's trial was like reliving the entire relationship through a prosecutor's lens. Federal prosecutor Sarah Chen walked me through my testimony dozens of times, helping me organize 18 months of memories into clear, compelling evidence. The jury needs to understand the sophistication of her manipulation, Chen explained. During one of our preparation sessions, your story illustrates how she built trust systematically, gained access gradually, and maintained the deception over an unprecedented length of time. I'd written a victim impact statement that took me weeks to complete. Every time I tried to capture the full scope of what Rebecca had done to me, the words felt inadequate. How do you explain the violation of having your capacity for love turned into a weapon against you? She didn't just steal money, I wrote in one draft. She stole my ability to trust my own judgment. She stole my faith in human connection. She stole my belief that love could be genuine and uncomplicated. The financial damage can theoretically be repaired. The psychological damage may be permanent. Chen helped me refine the statement, ensuring it would have maximum impact when read in court. She wanted the judge and jury to understand that Rebecca's crimes went far beyond simple theft. Marriage fraud victims suffer unique trauma, Chen explained. The betrayal is totally emotional, physical, financial, psychological. Your testimony needs to convey that reality. The media attention surrounding the case was intense. Rebecca's arrest had generated national interest because marriage fraud was becoming increasingly common in the digital age. Dating apps and social media made it easier for predators to research targets and create convincing false personas. I agreed to several interviews with major news outlets, hoping to raise awareness about the warning signs of marriage fraud. The conversations were difficult, forcing me to relive painful memories while cameras rolled. What would you tell other people who might be targets? One reporter asked. Trust your instincts, I said. If someone seems too perfect, if their story has inconsistencies, if they're reluctant to discuss their past in detail, pay attention to those red flags. And never give anyone complete access to your financial accounts, no matter how much you love them. The preparation process also involved reviewing evidence with other victims. Michael, Robert, James, and I spent hours with prosecutors, comparing Rebecca's methods and identifying patterns that could strengthen the case. She used the same childhood stories with all of us, Robert observed. The bike accident scar, losing her brother to leukemia, growing up poor with parents who fought about money, same manipulation techniques too, Michael added, making us feel like heroes for helping her heal from past trauma, positioning herself as damaged but worth saving. James had created detailed financial analyses, showing how Rebecca had systematically gained access to each victim's assets. She starts small, he explained to the prosecutors. Minor purchases, small cash advances, nothing that would trigger immediate suspicion. Then she gradually escalates until she has enough access to make major transfers. The prosecution's strategy was to demonstrate that Rebecca was a career criminal who'd spent years perfecting her craft. They wanted to show premeditation, sophistication, and complete lack of remorse. She's not someone who made desperate mistakes, Chen told us. She's a predator who built a business around destroying people's lives. The sentencing needs to reflect that reality. Rebecca's defense team, meanwhile, was preparing to argue that she was a victim herself, someone who'd been forced into criminal behavior by circumstances beyond her control. They planned to emphasize her tragic backstory and suggest that she genuinely cared about her victims. They'll try to humanize her, Chen warned. Make her seem sympathetic, like someone who got trapped in a bad situation rather than someone who chose to become a predator. Your testimony needs to counter that narrative. I spent hours practicing my testimony, learning to stay calm under cross-examination and stick to factual statements rather than emotional reactions. The defense would likely try to make me seem bitter or vindictive, someone seeking revenge rather than justice. Remember, Chen coached, you're not on trial here. Rebecca is. Don't let them turn you into the defendant. The hardest part of preparation was watching surveillance videos that the FBI had collected during their investigation. Footage of Rebecca using fake identities, meeting with forgers, even conducting what appeared to be reconnaissance on potential targets. In one video, she was sitting in a coffee shop near my office, clearly watching my building and timing my arrival and departure. This was months before we'd supposedly met by chance at the charity gala. She stalked you, Chen observed. The meeting at the fundraiser wasn't coincidence. It was a carefully planned approach based on weeks of surveillance. Seeing that footage was devastating. It proved beyond doubt that our entire relationship had been premeditated, that Rebecca had chosen me as a target long before our first conversation. Even our chance encounter had been meticulously orchestrated. The prosecution also had Rebecca's burner phone, with its detailed files on potential victims. My profile was in there, complete with financial assessments, psychological evaluations, and strategic notes about how to approach me. Divorced twice? One note read, defensive about relationship failures, likely to respond to wounded bird approach. Financial advisor understands money but may be overconfident about spotting deception. In personal relationships, reading Rebecca's clinical assessment of my vulnerabilities was like being dissected alive. She'd reduced me to a collection of exploitable weaknesses, a puzzle to be solved for profit. This is actually good evidence, Chen assured me. It shows the calculated nature of her crimes. She wasn't acting impulsively or out of desperation, she was conducting a sophisticated criminal operation. As the trial date approached, I found myself increasingly anxious about seeing Rebecca again. We'd had no contact since her arrest, and I wasn't sure how I'd react to being in the same room with her. It's normal to feel conflicted, the victim advocate assigned to our case explained. You loved someone who didn't exist, but the person who created that illusion is very real. Seeing her again will bring up complex emotions. The trial was scheduled to last 2 weeks. Rebecca had initially pleaded not guilty, forcing us to testify and relive our trauma publicly. But her lawyers had hinted that she might change her plea if offered a reasonable sentence. 20 years, Chen told us during our final preparation meeting. That's what we're asking for, and that's probably what she'll get if convicted. The evidence is overwhelming. 20 years seemed both too much and too little. Too much for someone who'd once made me laugh over dinner and held me when I had nightmares. Too little for someone who'd spent years destroying innocent people's lives for profit. Justice, I was learning, was more complicated than I'd expected. The federal courthouse in Denver was buzzing with media attention. The morning Rebecca's trial began, I arrived early with the other victims, escorted through a side entrance to avoid the cameras and reporters clustered on the front steps. Rebecca looked different when they brought her into the courtroom. Gone was every trace of Sarah Mitchell's soft femininity. Her hair was pulled back severely. She wore a plain gray suit, and her expression was completely neutral. She glanced at the victims section once, her eyes meeting mine for just a moment, before looking away. Your Honor, Prosecutor Sarah Chen began in her opening statement. This case is about a predator who spent years perfecting the art of destroying people's lives for profit. Rebecca Sullivan didn't commit crimes of passion or desperation. She built a criminal enterprise around exploiting the human need for love and connection. Chen laid out the prosecution's case methodically. 7 documented marriages, multiple identities, sophisticated financial crimes, and nearly $2 million in total damages. She described Rebecca's operation as a business, complete with research and development, strategic planning, and quality control measures. The defendant approached each victim the same way. Chen explained to the jury, she researched their vulnerabilities, crafted a persona designed to appeal to their specific needs, gained their trust through manufactured intimacy, then systematically drained their financial resources before disappearing. Rebecca's defense attorney, Thomas Morrison, painted a very different picture in his opening statement. He described a young woman forced into criminal behavior by an abusive boyfriend, someone who'd been trying to escape an impossible situation. Rebecca Sullivan is not the mastermind prosecutor Chen wants you to believe, Morrison argued. She's a victim herself, someone who was coerced into criminal behavior and then trapped by circumstances beyond her control. She stayed with Mr. Thompson for 18 months, not because she was planning a bigger theft, but because she was trying to find a way out of the criminal life that had been forced upon her. I was the prosecution's first witness. Walking to the witness stand, felt Rebecca's eyes on me, but I forced myself not to look in her direction. Chen led me through my relationship with Rebecca chronologically, from our meeting at the charity gala through the discovery of her true identity. Mr. Thompson, did the defendant ever express genuine affection for you? Chen asked. I believed she did at the time, I replied, but knowing what I know now about her methods and the other victims, I think everything was calculated to maintain her access to my assets. During cross-examination, Morrison tried to make me seem vindictive and bitter. Mr. Thompson, isn't it possible that Ms. Sullivan developed genuine feelings for you, but she was conflicted about her criminal behavior? If she had genuine feelings for me, she wouldn't have spent months stealing from my accounts while planning to disappear with $150,000. But she didn't take that money, did she? She was arrested before completing her plan, only because I discovered her true identity first. The escape plan was already in motion. Morrison played portions of my recorded conversation with Rebecca, focusing on moments where she seemed to express regret or genuine emotion. Does this sound like someone without feelings, Mr. Thompson? It sounds like someone who got caught and was trying to minimize the consequences, I replied. The other victims testified over the next 2 days. Michael Torres broke down on the stand describing how Rebecca had manipulated his military service trauma. Robert Chen's quiet dignity was heartbreaking as he explained how she'd used his grief over his wife's death. James Murphy provided the most damaging testimony from a technical standpoint. His forensic analysis of Rebecca's financial crimes was comprehensive and devastating, showing the sophistication of her money laundering operations. This wasn't amateur hour, James told the jury. Ms. Sullivan had access to professional-grade forgers, established money laundering networks, and sophisticated identity theft resources. She was part of an organized criminal enterprise. The prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, surveillance footage, the contents of Rebecca's escape bag, communications with other criminals, everything painted a picture of a career predator who'd spent years perfecting her craft. On the fourth day of trial, something unexpected happened. Rebecca fired her attorney and requested to represent herself. Judge Martinez warned her about the dangers of self-representation, but she insisted on proceeding. "Your Honor," Rebecca said, standing to address the court, "I want to change my plea to guilty on all charges." The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs. Judge Martinez called for order and questioned Rebecca extensively to ensure she understood the implications of her decision. "Miss Sullivan, you understand that by pleading guilty, you're giving up your right to appeal and accepting responsibility for these crimes." "I understand, Your Honor. I'm tired of lying, tired of running, tired of hurting people. I want to accept responsibility for what I've done." Rebecca turned to face the victims section directly. "I know my apology means nothing after what I've done, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. You deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved honesty and genuine affection, not manipulation and theft." Her voice cracked slightly as she continued. "I can't undo the damage I've caused, but I can stop making it worse. I plead guilty to all charges and throw myself on the mercy of the court." Judge Martinez scheduled sentencing for the following week, giving the prosecution time to prepare their sentencing recommendation and allowing victims to submit updated impact statements. "This is unusual," Prosecutor Chen told us during a recess. "Defendants rarely plead guilty this late in the process, especially when they've been maintaining their innocence." She must have realized the evidence was overwhelming. "I wasn't sure what to make of Rebecca's sudden change in strategy. Was this genuine remorse, or another manipulation designed to generate sympathy for sentencing? After everything she'd put us through, I found it hard to believe anything she said, but watching her in that courtroom, stripped of all pretense, and facing the consequences of her actions, I saw something I'd never seen before: genuine vulnerability. Not the manufactured fragility of Sarah Mitchell, but the raw fear of someone whose carefully constructed world was finally collapsing." The trial transcript would become part of the official record, documenting not just Rebecca's crimes but the stories of the people she'd destroyed. It was a permanent record of the human cost of sophisticated fraud. A warning about the predators who lurk in the spaces where lonely people look for love. Rebecca Sullivan had finally been held accountable for her crimes. But for her victims, the real trial, learning to trust again, learning to love again, learning to forgive ourselves for being human, was just beginning. The sentencing hearing took place on a gray February morning. Exactly 8 months after I'd first found those marriage certificates in Rebecca's closet, the courtroom was packed with victims, family members, FBI agents, and media representatives who'd been following the case. Judge Martinez had reviewed all the evidence, victim impact statements, and Rebecca's psychological evaluations. Her report painted a picture of someone with severe antisocial personality disorder, minimal capacity for empathy, and a long history of manipulative behavior. "Ms. Sullivan," Judge Martinez began, "you have pleaded guilty to multiple federal crimes spanning 6 years in 8 states. Your actions have caused nearly $2 million in documented financial damage and immeasurable psychological harm to your victims." Rebecca stood to receive her sentence, dressed in the same gray suit she'd worn throughout the trial. She kept her eyes fixed on the judge, her expression calm and resigned. "The court has considered your guilty plea, your apparent remorse, and your cooperation with federal investigators. However, the sophistication of your crimes, the number of victims, and the calculated nature of your behavior demand a significant sentence." Judge Martinez sentenced Rebecca to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, though the judge acknowledged that recovery of the stolen money was unlikely. 12 years, Michael whispered beside me. "It doesn't feel like enough, but I found myself feeling something unexpected, not satisfaction, but sadness." 12 years meant Rebecca would be 46 when she was released, middle-aged and institutionalized, with no legitimate work history or social connections. Her life, in any meaningful sense, was effectively over. After sentencing, the prosecution held a press conference on the courthouse steps. Prosecutor Chen emphasized that the case sent a clear message about the consequences of marriage fraud. "This sentence reflects the serious nature of crimes that exploit people's fundamental need for love and connection," Chen announced. "We hope it serves as a deterrent to others who might consider similar criminal activity." The restitution order required Rebecca to pay back nearly $2 million to her victims, plus interest and court costs. The practical reality was that most of us would never see that money. Rebecca had no assets, no income prospects in prison, and limited earning potential after release. "It's about the principle," James Murphy explained to reporters. "She can't profit from her crimes, and any money she ever earns will go to compensating her victims first." The restitution order would follow Rebecca for the rest of her life. Even after completing her prison sentence, any legitimate income she earned would be garnished until all victims were compensated. Agent Williams updated us on the broader investigation that Rebecca's case had triggered. Federal authorities were pursuing the forgers and money launderers who'd enabled her crimes, trying to dismantle the entire network that supported marriage fraud operations. Rebecca's cooperation has been valuable, Williams told us. She's provided information about criminal contacts, money laundering methods, and other potential perpetrators. It won't reduce her sentence, but it might help prevent other people from becoming victims. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court provided disturbing insights into Rebecca's mindset. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the forensic psychologist who'd examined her, described someone with profound emotional detachment and an inability to form genuine human connections. Ms. Sullivan demonstrates classic antisocial personality traits, Dr. Harper's report stated. She views other people as objects to be manipulated rather than individuals, deserving of respect. Her criminal behavior appears to be ego with her core personality rather than a departure from it. The report recommended intensive psychological treatment during incarceration. Though it noted that antisocial personality disorder was notoriously difficult to treat effectively, she may learn to modify her behavior, Dr. Harper concluded, but fundamental changes in her capacity for empathy or genuine emotional connection are unlikely. Reading that evaluation was somehow both validating and heartbreaking. It confirmed that our relationships with Rebecca had been doomed from the start. She was psychologically incapable of the genuine love we'd thought we'd found, but it also meant she was essentially trapped in her own emotional limitations, unable to experience the authentic connections that make life meaningful. The media coverage of Rebecca's sentencing was extensive. Marriage fraud was apparently becoming increasingly common, with online dating making it easier for predators to research targets and create convincing false personas. This case highlights the vulnerability of people seeking love online. One expert interviewed for a news segment explained, the anonymity and distance provided by technology make it easier for criminals to construct elaborate deceptions. I participated in several interviews, hoping to raise awareness about the warning signs of marriage fraud. The conversations were difficult but felt necessary if sharing my story could prevent someone else from experiencing the same devastation. The public humiliation was worthwhile. What would you tell someone who thinks they might be in a relationship with a marriage fraud perpetrator? One reporter asked. Trust your instincts, I replied. If something feels off, investigate. Don't ignore red flags because you want the relationship to work. And never give anyone complete access to your finances, no matter how much you love them. The victim support group that had formed during the investigation decided to continue meeting even after Rebecca's sentencing. We'd discovered that healing from this type of betrayal was a long process that required ongoing support. We're the only people who really understand what this feels like, Robert observed during one of our meetings. Other people try to be supportive, but unless you've experienced this specific type of violation, you can't really comprehend the damage. The federal prison where Rebecca would serve her sentence was in Colorado, about 2 hours from Denver. I found myself wondering if I'd ever visit her, if there was any point in trying to understand how someone becomes capable of such calculated cruelty. But mostly, I tried not to think about Rebecca at all. She'd taken enough of my life already. I wasn't going to give her any more of my mental energy than necessary. Justice had been served, but it felt incomplete. 12 years in prison couldn't undo the damage Rebecca had caused or restore what she'd taken from us. It could only ensure that she wouldn't hurt anyone else for a while, and even that felt temporary. The real work rebuilding our lives, learning to trust again, finding meaning beyond our shared trauma, was just beginning. 3 months after Rebecca's sentencing, I started seeing Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery from sophisticated fraud cases. Our first session took place in her comfortable office overlooking downtown Denver, the same city where I'd built and lost my relationship with someone who didn't exist. Victims of marriage fraud often struggle with what we call reality testing, Dr. Foster explained during our initial consultation. When someone has systematically deceived you about fundamental aspects of their identity, it becomes difficult to trust your own perceptions. She was right. I found myself second-guessing every interaction, analyzing conversations for hidden meanings, looking for manipulation in the most innocent exchanges. A casual compliment from a coworker felt suspect. A friendly smile from a barista seemed calculated. I'd lost the ability to take human interactions at face value. The goal isn't to become paranoid or cynical, Dr. Foster continued. It's to rebuild your confidence in your own judgment while developing healthy skepticism. You want to be able to trust people again, but with appropriate boundaries. My therapy sessions became a safe space to process the complex emotions surrounding my relationship with Rebecca. Inger was easy. I was furious about the deception, the theft, the violation of my trust. But the other emotions were more complicated. I still miss her sometimes, I admitted during one session. Not Rebecca, but Sarah, the woman I thought I was in love with. Is that crazy? It's completely normal, Dr. Foster assured me. You experienced genuine emotions in that relationship, even if the other person didn't. The love you felt was real, even though its object was fictional. She helped me understand that grieving the loss of Sarah Mitchell was a necessary part of healing. I needed to mourn the relationship I thought I'd had, the future I'd planned, the person I'd believed myself to be with her. You're not just recovering from fraud, Dr. Foster explained. You're recovering from the death of an entire version of your life that requires real grief work. The therapy sessions included practical exercises for rebuilding trust. Dr. Foster taught me to identify red flags in relationships, to set appropriate boundaries, and to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. The goal isn't to become invulnerable, she emphasized. Vulnerability is necessary for authentic connection. The goal is to be vulnerable in safe situations with trustworthy people. One exercise involved reviewing my relationship with Rebecca, to identify moments when my instincts had warned me something was wrong. There had been more red flags than I'd admitted to myself at the time. Your intuition was actually quite good, Dr. Foster observed. You noticed inconsistencies in her stories, questioned her reluctance to discuss her past, felt something was off about her social media presence, but you dismissed those concerns because you wanted the relationship to work. She helped me understand that my vulnerability to Rebecca's manipulation wasn't a character flaw, it was a combination of specific circumstances that had made me an ideal target. My divorce history, my desire to be helpful and protective, my professional confidence, that had made me overestimate my ability to spot deception in personal relationships. Sophisticated fraudsters study their targets carefully, Dr. Foster explained. Rebecca chose you because she knew exactly which psychological buttons to push. That doesn't make you weak or naive, it makes you human. The therapy notes from our sessions became a record of my gradual healing. Week by week, I could see progress in my ability to form normal social connections, to trust my judgment, to believe in the possibility of authentic relationships again. I went on a coffee date, I told Dr. Foster 6 months into therapy. First time since Rebecca. It was terrifying. How did it go? Fine, actually. Nice woman. Normal conversation, but I kept analyzing everything she said, looking for inconsistencies or manipulation. It was exhausting. That hypervigilance is normal after what you've experienced. It will fade as you rebuild confidence in your judgment. The coffee date had been with Emma, a teacher I'd met through friends. She was refreshingly straightforward now. Mysterious past, no sob stories, no reluctance to discuss her family or work. After months of therapy, I was learning to appreciate transparency as its own form of attractiveness. Dr. Foster encouraged me to reconnect with friends and family members I'd neglected during my relationship with Rebecca. I'd been so focused on Sarah's needs and emotional well-being that I'd isolated myself from other important relationships. Fraudsters often encourage that isolation, Dr. Foster noted. It makes you more dependent on them for emotional support and social validation. Rebuilding those connections was awkward at first. How do you explain to people that your was actually a wanted criminal who'd been systematically destroying your life? How do you apologize for 18 months of canceled plans and declined invitations? But my real friends were understanding and supportive. My sister Rachel, who'd been suspicious of Sarah from the beginning, was particularly kind about not saying "I told you so." I knew something was off, Rachel admitted over dinner. But I could never have imagined the truth was this bizarre. I thought maybe she was married or something normal like that. My therapy sessions also addressed the financial impact of Rebecca's crimes. While the stolen money was painful, the real damage was to my sense of financial security and judgment. I keep questioning every financial decision, I told Dr. Foster, second-guessing myself, seeing threats everywhere. I've become paralyzed about money. Financial trauma is real, she replied. When someone violates your financial boundaries, it affects your sense of safety and control. We need to work on rebuilding your confidence in financial decision-making. She helped me develop new financial habits and boundaries that would protect me without making me overly paranoid. Separate accounts for different purposes, regular monitoring of credit reports, and clear limits on what financial information I'd share with future romantic partners. The victim support group continued meeting monthly, providing a space for all of us to share our healing progress and setbacks. We'd become an unlikely family, bound together by shared trauma but working toward individual recovery. I'm seeing someone new, Michael announced during one meeting. It's been 2 years since Rebecca, and I think I'm finally ready. How does it feel? Robert asked. Scary, but good. I told her about Rebecca early on, explained why I might need extra patience with trust issues. She was understanding about it. Watching my fellow victims begin to heal and move forward gave me hope for my own recovery. We were all learning, slowly and carefully, to believe in the possibility of authentic love. Again, Dr. Foster helped me understand that complete healing didn't mean forgetting what had happened or returning to my previous level of trust. You're not trying to go backward, she explained. You're integrating this experience into a wiser, more discerning version of yourself. The goal is informed trust, not blind trust. After a year of therapy, I felt ready to try dating more seriously. Not because I'd forgotten about Rebecca or stopped being affected by what she'd done, but because I'd learned to trust my own judgment again, while maintaining appropriate caution. The therapy notes documented my journey from victim to survivor. From someone broken by betrayal to someone strengthened by the process of healing, Dr. Foster had helped me understand that recovery wasn't about returning to who I'd been before Rebecca. It was about becoming someone new, someone who could hold both wisdom and hope, caution and openness. You've done the work, Dr. Foster told me during what would be our final regular session. You've processed the trauma, developed healthy boundaries, and rebuilt your confidence. You're ready to trust yourself again. I left her office that day carrying a folder of therapy notes that documented my transformation. They were evidence that even the most devastating betrayals could be survived, that even the deepest wounds could heal, and that it was possible to find love again after having your heart weaponized against you. 2 years after Rebecca's sentencing, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I left the financial advisory firm where I'd worked for 8 years and started my own practice, specializing in financial security and fraud prevention. Thompson Financial Security opened its doors in a small office downtown, with a mission statement that reflected my hard-won expertise: protecting your assets from sophisticated fraud through education, vigilance, and proven security measures. My first clients were other fraud victims, people who'd been targeted by investment scams, identity thieves, and romance fraudsters. They came to me not just for financial advice, but because I understood the psychological impact of being systematically deceived. You get it, one client told me. Other advisors treat fraud like a simple math problem: money lost, money recovered, case closed. You understand that it's about more than money. The business license and professional certifications that established my new practice felt like symbols of reclamation. Rebecca had tried to destroy my financial stability and professional confidence. Instead, her crimes had become the foundation for a more meaningful career. I developed educational seminars about romance fraud, speaking at community centers, senior facilities, and dating groups about the warning signs and prevention strategies. The presentations were difficult at first, but sharing my story became easier with practice. Romance fraudsters target people who are lonely, vulnerable, or recently divorced. I'd explain to audiences. They research their victims carefully and craft personas designed to appeal to specific psychological needs. The key to protection is understanding their methods. The seminars attracted people who'd had their own encounters with suspected fraudsters: a widow in her 70s who'd been approached by someone asking for help with a business opportunity, a divorced man who'd met someone online whose stories didn't quite add up, a woman whose online boyfriend always had emergencies requiring money transfers. Trust your instincts, I'd tell them. If something feels wrong, investigate. Real love doesn't require you to ignore red flags or compromise your financial security. My dating life gradually improved as I learned to balance caution with openness. Emma, the teacher I'd met for coffee, became a regular part of my life. She was patient with my trust issues and impressed by my commitment to building a relationship on complete honesty. I know about your ex-fiancé, Emma told me early in our relationship. My friends filled me in before our first date. I appreciate that you've been upfront about your history. Does it worry you? I asked. It makes me sad that someone hurt you that badly, but it also shows me that you take relationships seriously, that you believe in fighting for love even after being betrayed. That's attractive. Emma attended some of my fraud prevention seminars, helping with logistics and offering her own perspective on recognizing deceptive behavior. Kids are natural con artists, she'd joke. Teaching middle school has given me excellent training in spotting lies and manipulation. Her humor helped me maintain perspective about my experience with Rebecca. Yes, I'd been victimized by a sophisticated Redditor, but I'd also survived, learned, and built something meaningful from the wreckage. The victim support group evolved into a nonprofit organization focused on marriage, fraud awareness, and victim assistance. We called it the Authentic Love Foundation, providing resources for people who'd been targeted by romance fraudsters. We want to prevent others from going through what we experienced, Robert explained during the foundation's launch event. But we also want to show current victims that recovery is possible. The foundation offered support groups, legal referrals, and educational resources. We partnered with law enforcement agencies to train officers in recognizing marriage fraud cases and worked with dating platforms to improve security measures. Michael became the foundation's executive director, channeling his experience into full-time advocacy work. James used his forensic accounting skills to help other victims trace stolen funds and build cases against perpetrators. Robert focused on grief counseling for people who'd lost both money and emotional connection to fraudsters. My role was financial education and fraud prevention. I developed workshops, wrote articles, and consulted with businesses about protecting their employees from sophisticated scams. The work was rewarding but also kept Rebecca's crimes fresh in my memory. Every new victim I counseled, every fraud case I reviewed, reminded me of what she'd done to me and others. But it also reinforced my belief that something positive could emerge from even the worst experiences. You've turned your trauma into purpose, Dr. Foster observed during one of our periodic check-in sessions. That's a healthy way to process what happened to you. 3 years after starting my new practice, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Rebecca, writing from federal prison in Colorado. The envelope sat on my desk for a week before I worked up the courage to open it. David, the letter began, I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you throw this away without reading it, but I wanted you to know that I think about what I did to you every day. Prison has given me time to reflect on the damage I caused, and I'm truly sorry. The letter continued for several pages, describing her life in prison, her participation in therapy programs, and her attempts to understand how she'd become someone capable of such cruelty. I know my apology means nothing after what I put you through, she wrote, but I hope you've found happiness and peace. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. I read the letter several times, trying to determine if it was genuine remorse or another manipulation. In the end, I decided it didn't matter. Rebecca's feelings about her crimes were less important than the life I'd built in spite of them. I wrote a brief response. I've moved on and built a good life. I hope you use your time in prison to become someone better than who you were. Don't contact me again. That was the last communication I ever had with Rebecca Sullivan. She became part of my pestan, important part that had shaped who I became, but not someone who had any claim on my future. The business continued to grow, the foundation expanded its reach, and my relationship with Emma deepened into something I'd never experienced before, love built on complete honesty and mutual respect. You're nothing like what I thought I wanted, I told Emma one evening as we sat on my back deck, watching the sunset over the mountains. Is that good or bad? She asked. It's perfect, I replied. You're real in a way I didn't know I needed. There's no mystery, no manipulation, no hidden agenda, just genuine affection and partnership. That's what love should be, Emma said simply. Complicated enough to be interesting, simple enough to be sustainable. She was right. After years of being manipulated and deceived, I'd found someone who offered something more valuable than passion or excitement. Shit offered truth. And truth, I'd learned, was the foundation for everything else that mattered in a relationship. 5 years after finding those marriage certificates in Rebecca's closet, I stood at a podium in the Denver Convention Center, addressing 3 people at the National Conference on Financial Fraud Prevention. The speaking engagement materials in my briefcase contained testimonials from victims I'd helped, statistics about the growing epidemic of romance fraud, and strategies for protecting vulnerable populations from sophisticated predators. Marriage fraud is one of the fastest-growing crimes in America, I told the audience of law enforcement officers, financial professionals, and victim advocates. Last year alone, Americans lost over $2 billion to romance scams. But the financial damage is just the beginning. The psychological trauma can last for decades. I shared my own story, no longer feeling embarrassed or defensive about being victimized. Instead, my experience with Rebecca had become a teaching tool, a way to help others recognize and prevent similar crimes. I was a financial advisor with 20 years of experience, I explained. I thought I was too smart, too professional, too sophisticated to be fooled by a con artist. That overconfidence made me an ideal target for someone like Rebecca Sullivan. The audience listened intently as I described Rebecca's methods, the warning signs I'd ignored, and the devastating discovery that the woman I'd planned to marry was a wanted federal criminal. But I also shared the recovery process, the rebuilding of trust, and the meaningful work that had emerged from the ashes of betrayal. Fraud victims often ask me if they'll ever feel normal again. I continued. The answer is no, you won't feel normal again. You'll feel better than normal. You'll be wiser, more discerning, more appreciative of authentic relationships. You'll know the difference between real love and manufactured emotion. After my presentation, people approached with their own stories of being deceived by romance fraudsters. A retired teacher who'd lost her pension to an online boyfriend, a widower who'd been targeted at his wife's funeral by someone claiming to understand his grief, a young professional who'd discovered her fiancé was already married to 2 other women. How do you learn to trust again? The teacher asked. Slowly and carefully, I replied. But you do learn. Trust isn't binary, it's not all or nothing. You can learn to trust specific people in specific contexts while maintaining healthy boundaries. The conference materials included research I'd conducted with the Authentic Love Foundation about the long-term impact of marriage fraud on victims. Our studies showed that recovery was possible, but often took years, and that victims who received proper support and counseling fared significantly better than those who tried to heal alone. Emma accompanied me to the conference, offering her own perspective on rebuilding relationships after trauma. We'd been married for 2 years, and she'd become an integral part of my advocacy work. Trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets, she told one workshop session. David earned my trust gradually by being consistently honest, even about difficult topics. I earned his trust by being patient with his healing process and understanding that his caution wasn't about MIT, was about protecting himself. Our marriage was everything. My relationship with Rebecca hadn't been transparent, stable, built on mutual respect rather than manufactured need. Emma knew all my vulnerabilities, all my fears, all my mistakes, and she chose to love me anyway, not because I needed rescue, but because we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. The difference, I told conference attendees, is that healthy love makes you feel more like yourself, not less. Rebecca made me feel like I needed to be someone different, stronger, more protective, more generous. Emma loves me for who I actually am. During a break between sessions, I received a call from Agent Williams, now retired from the FBI but still involved in fraud prevention advocacy. David, I thought you should know Rebecca Sullivan was released on parole last month. The news hit me like a physical blow. I'd known this day would come eventually, but 5 years had passed so quickly that I'd stopped thinking about her potential release. How do you feel about that? Emma asked when I told her. Concerned? I admitted, not for me. I'm not worried about her contacting me or trying to hurt me personally, but I worry about her next victim. Rebecca had served 8 years of her 12-year sentence, earning early release through good behavior and completion of various prison programs. According to Agent Williams, she was required to live in a halfway house, maintain employment, and check in regularly with her parole officer. She's prohibited from using dating apps or social media, Williams explained. Her internet activity is monitored, and she can't access financial services without supervision. The restrictions are designed to prevent her from reoffending. But I knew Rebecca was intelligent and resourceful. If she wanted to return to her criminal career, she'd find ways around the monitoring. The only real protection for potential victims was education and awareness. That evening, I updated my presentation materials to include information about Rebecca's release. Not to shame or endanger her, but to remind audiences that these predators eventually return to society and that vigilance was always necessary. Rebecca Sullivan is now a free woman, I told the final session of the conference. She served her time and deserves a chance to build a legitimate life. But she's also a convicted predator with sophisticated skills and a history of targeting vulnerable people. The best protection for all of us is awareness, education, and community support for potential victims. The speaking engagement program concluded with a panel discussion about the future of fraud prevention. Technology was making it easier for criminals to research targets and create convincing false personas, but it was also providing new tools for verification and protection. The arms race between fraudsters and prevention efforts will continue, I told the panel audience. But knowledge remains our best defense. The more people understand these crimes, the harder it becomes for predators to find suitable victims. Flying home from the conference, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since finding those marriage certificates. Rebecca had intended to destroy me financially and emotionally. Instead, her crimes had led me to meaningful work, genuine love, and a sense of purpose I'd never experienced before. Do you think she'd try to contact you? Emma asked as our plane descended toward Denver. I don't know, I replied. But if she does, I'm ready. I'm not the same person she manipulated 5 years ago. I'm stronger, wiser, and surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. The conference materials in my briefcase contained contact information for hundreds of professionals working to combat fraud and support victims. We'd built a network of awareness and protection that hadn't existed when Rebecca was destroying lives with impunity. I thought about the other victims who'd shared their stories at the conference. People who'd survived devastating betrayals and channeled their experiences into advocacy and education. We were proof that even the worst human predators couldn't ultimately destroy the human capacity for resilience, growth, and authentic connection. Rebecca Sullivan had taught me hard lessons about trust, manipulation, and the sophisticated nature of modern crime, but she'd also taught me about my own strength, about the power of community support, and about the difference between love based on need and love based on genuine compatibility. I was grateful for those lessons, even though I'd never wanted to learn them. They'd made me a better financial advisor, a better husband, a better advocate for other victims. Rebecca had tried to take everything from me, but instead she'd given me a life more meaningful than anything I could have imagined. As we landed in Denver, I looked forward to returning to my office, my clients, my work with the foundation, and my life with Emma. I was home, in every sense that mattered, living a life built on truth rather than deception, surrounded by people who knew exactly who I was and chose to be there anyway. Rebecca Sullivan was free, but so was I, free from her influence, free from the damage she'd tried to inflict, free to build whatever future I chose. And that, ultimately, was the best revenge of all. Word count, 10,000 words.